F. Scott Fitzgerald best described the 1920s in his novel The Great Gatsby by saying, "The parties were bigger, the pace was faster, the shows were broader, the buildings were higher, the morals were looser, and the liquor was cheaper." While there were a lot of positive things that had to do with the 1920s, there were a lot of negative aspects as well, creating a Gilded Age.
On November 2, 1920, the first successful radio broadcasting happened when KBKA announced the winner of the presidential election. This would forever change the way news, entertainment, and sports programs were delivered to the public. By 1922, over 500 commercial radio systems were delivering news and entertainment to living rooms across the country. And 2 decades later, Franklin D. Roosevelt, between the years of 1933 and 1944, conducted a series of 30 radio broadcastings to the people across the country. This would become known as fireside chats and would play a defining role in how presidents delivered news to the public. The automobile industry entered the mainstream in 1920. Finally, the average family could consider owning a car. Manufacturers had found a way to make cars more efficient and safer to drive. Owning a car completely changed people's lives. Suddenly, families could travel from city to city on the weekends, and people could commute further distances for work. Roads designed for horses were being replaced with roads for cars. Engines were more powerful than ever before, and some interiors were more comfortable than home furniture. The assembly line would increase production and help to fuel the American economy. Henry Ford installed his first moving assembly line for the mass production of automobiles. His invention reduced the time it took to build a car from nearly 12 hours to 2.5 minutes. Though the Model T did not last much longer, by the middle of the 1920s, consumers wanted a car that was less expensive and had more bells and whistles. The assembly line could now provide that.
The 1920s was a period of progress and transition in the life of the American woman. The 1920s brought the generation of flappers, young women who expressed freedom by wearing revealing outfits, bobbing their hair, and expressing casual sexuality. This newfound sense of self, embraced by celebrities like Zelda Fitzgerald, was liberating for many women and brought about the empowerment of the modern American woman. 1920 marked an important culminating moment in the fight for women's suffrage. Thanks to American women everywhere and groups like the National Women's Party, the 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920. The right of women to vote represented a huge leap for democratic voting rights as well as women's rights. While certain aspects of American culture were becoming more progressive, a more sinister force was brewing across the United States. The 1920s brought the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, a vigilante supremacist group that targeted minorities including African Americans, Jewish people, Catholics, and immigrant groups. Membership in this group bloomed in the 1920s and encouraged animosity between citizens in a diverse country. The surge of Klansmen in the 1920s would increase the racial divide in America, creating tensions that would lead to unlawful segregation and the Jim Crow laws of the 1950s. This often overlooked aspect of the 1920s represents the time period being a Gilded Age. The 1920s brought growth and expression for groups that had previously been excluded from the American dream. Culture blossomed in America's cities as music and literature came to the main stage. The Harlem Renaissance brought the talent of African American musicians like Duke Ellington as well as Louis Armstrong. This cultural rebirth in the African American community allowed for the discussion of race relations in the U.S. This was seen in Langston Hughes' poem I Too Sing America, where he discusses the plight of African American people during the time.
While America was experiencing a cultural revolution, across the Atlantic, Europe was recovering from World War I. World War I officially ended with the signing of the Treaty of Versailles, June 28, 1919. This was a leading cause in World War II because of the amount of massive debt that Germany had accumulated. America attempted to help Germany by installing the Dawes Plan to help with the reparations. The economy in Germany had collapsed, the government had lost power, the military was weak, the Germans were angry. These factors altogether created the perfect storm in Germany. The horrendous economy had led to a weak government and a weak military, which instilled a lot of fear in Germany. The weak government and the German fear made it possible for Adolf Hitler to be elected, and with the German anger and Hitler's mindset, it led to World War II. Communism in China is largely due to a man named Mao Zedong. Following the Boxer Rebellion in 1900, the Chinese citizens experienced starvation, extreme poverty, grief resulting in loss of many innocent lives. This set the stage for men like Zedong to create a communist government. Being under the rule of warlords until around 1916, many Chinese began to join revolutionary forces and political parties in hopes of changing their community. During the Great Revolution, China saw several movements which fostered a path into communism, which would lead to many problems down the line for Americans. During the 1920s, Gandhi preached civil disobedience and peaceful resistance against British rule, and this ended up sentencing him to 6 years in prison. This would lead to many people, like Martin Luther King Jr., who would follow in his footsteps of civil disobedience and lead to many cultural revolutions in the future.